what is the solution to these women that they don't feel the career boss babe thing is the solution? They don't want to be a stay-at-home and they're looking for some kind of hybrid solution.
I think it's a really tough world for women today. And the world that we are sort of pushed into corporate-wise and business-wise is a male world.
I was fed a lie, which is that you can have everything all at once, and that's simply not true.
Unfollow people and influencers that make you feel bad about yourself.
The patriarchy, like I hate that word so much.
Isolate mammals, you isolate animals, humans, and we get sick, we get depressed, and we die.
If your doctor isn't asking you how much water you're drinking, what you're eating, how much you're sleeping, how much you're exercising, and how much you go outside, you don't have a doctor, you have a drug dealer. Unni, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to meet you and have this conversation.
Candice, I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
I always do a little bit of like snooping right before. I'm like, okay, what are they up to? And like, there have been times where I see people post and like, and I cancel it because I'm like, never mind. They get into something really crazy. I have been loving all of your recent stuff, and I really like that you're not afraid to kind of jump into not even like all political, but like social and cultural topics that are really relevant. And you offer a third perspective a lot of times, which I think is really beautiful because there's so much division when it comes to anything polarizing. And sometimes maybe that's necessary, right? Like they're very much, I believe there is like good and evil, but I think it would be a really good practice to exercise third perspective and what other angle can we kind of look at this thing. And the one that I thought was interesting was, it's this football player, and I'm going to mess up his name. Buckirk. I don't even know. I don't follow sports. Like one of my co-hosts on my other show, he's always like, anytime someone talks about sports, just go, yay, sports, because I have no idea what I'm talking about. But I did see his speech that kind of went viral, and I was really surprised at the backlash that a lot of people are having, especially these high-powered celebrity women. And your perspective, like my interpretation of your post was, his solution wasn't exactly the answer either. So I guess when it comes to women, there is a huge lack of purpose or like feeling like we fit in to a lot of things. And I would love your perspective, and then I'll share mine. But like, what is the solution to these women that they don't feel the career boss babe thing is the solution? They don't want to be a stay-at-home and they're looking for some kind of hybrid solution.
Yeah, such a great question, a great conversation, and something we could talk about for days, I feel, because I think the problem for women today is that we're not valued. The feminine isn't valued. So what I think the feminist movement got wrong, although, like, of course, we want equal opportunity, we want to be valued as equal, all those things, of course. But what happened was that we were kind of pushed into this working professional success model for men. And so that's not helping us because we are, and as you know, like we were just talking about this, being a mom, trying to juggle all the things, all the roles that we play, as a spouse, as a mom, as a business woman, all these things, it's really tough. And coming into, and I used to work in the corporate world, and it was just so hard that I had to leave that world when I became a mom because it just wasn't, it was a choice that we made when our kids were born. Is that, am I going to be the mom who's away all the time traveling and doing her business and then just hiring a nanny to take care of the kids and raise the kids, or am actually just going to take a break from working and being at home with my mom, with the kids? But either way, I feel that, and that's a choice. And I respect whatever choice a woman makes, but it's really hard. It's a really tough one because you lose either way, because being a home, and that's something that I've struggled with. What is, like, who am I? What's my identity as a stay-at-home mom, and what's my value? Am I really valued by my spouse, by society? Not really. So it's a tough, I think it's a really tough world for women today. And the world that we are sort of pushed into corporate wise and business wise is a male world. And so we're just going in there in our masculine energy and not really bringing what we have to bring to the table, which is our feminine energy, if that makes sense.
And with a quick interruption to the episode, I hope you're really enjoying the conversation. If you could take a second out of your time and hit that like and subscribe, it would help us out a ton. Thank you, and let's get back to the episode. For me, the frustrating part, because I am still very much trying to figure it out, I feel weekly that I have these internal conflicts where I'm trying to figure out what is the life that I really want and how do I make that happen? Because for me, my pattern is getting in my own way all of
Mm,
the time. I'm constantly doing that. And a lot of it is kind of like that Eckhart Tolle way of thinking, which is almost all of the suffering that you are experiencing has not happened and never will happen. It's just all in your mind.
yeah.
So I'm like, okay, well, how can I alleviate that? Because it's always these worries of not showing up 100% in work, right? Like we've rescheduled this twice because of me, and I had like personal family stuff I had to move around. And then today, like we have people in town that kind of extended their trip and like they're all out and I'm here. And it's like always feeling like you're supposed to be in multiple places at the
Yeah.
same time and it's
Yeah.
impossible. So crafting your life very intentionally. And I think where this I I'm so sorry I'm messing up his name, but this football player
Yeah.
is getting it right is that I was fed a lie, which is that you can have everything all at once. And that's
Yep.
simply not true,
Yep.
especially as a woman. And it's not because of like the patriarchy. Like I hate that word so much. It's not
Yeah.
because of the patriarchy. It is because anyone who has children know that for the first however many years they just want mama.
Yep.
Right? Like there is a difference
Yep.
and it's just biology. So, yeah, that does mean that the mom is going to be the one that is making a lot of the sacrifices on the front end. And that's going to flip later, especially if you have boys. But you do have to have an honest inventory of what do you want. So, do you want to sacrifice some of that time and, what's the word? Like delegate some of the childcare, and then that way you can focus on some of your career. Do you want to just do your career? But I think that there a lot of the feeling of inadequacy or like not showing up is just because we haven't committed to a decision in like an honest way. So
Yeah.
we perpetuate the lie that we can do it all at the same time, and it's not true. There's going to be a trade-off. And for me, I'm very lucky because I can do this podcast like once a week, and we have these other huge projects. Like we're trying to open up a school, and it's like,
Oh, wow.
yes, I know. Huge
Awesome.
undertaking. And I was like, you know what? If it comes down to it, it's going to like the school is going to take all of my time and that is for my kids. And if I have to stop the podcast for a while, that's what I do because I have to be honest about my priorities.
Yeah.
And I think moms feel guilty because they know on some level they're prioritizing their career over their kids when they are making that choice to trade off. And it must be really hard if that work is not yours, like if you're working for someone else. So it's different if you are an author or public
Yeah.
speaker, podcast or whatever, and you're reinvesting into yourself, but to give something which is your most precious asset, which is your time,
Yeah.
just someone else, especially if you feel underappreciated, like that's got to suck. So
Yeah.
I think he does get it right is that we have been fed this lie that your career is the most important thing and that's what is going to be seen as valuable. And it's just not true. It's not true at all because you go through a cemetery. One of my friends just had a bit about this, and he's like, "What do you notice on tombstones? It's not net worth, or if you were a C
Mm,
executive, it's like mom, father,
that's
son, like
right.
all of these touch points, and that's where value is."
That's right. And where I think Butker is really courageous to speak out, although actually he did get standing ovation at the school that he at the college. And a
Mhm.
lot of people have applauded him, on social media as well. So but there, of course, there was this huge backlash that it's sort of unacceptable to but I where I think he's right is that it's okay, it's valuable to choose to be at home as well and take care of your family. And as you said, whether we like it or not, there are sacrifices with both.
Mhm.
So you take a break in your career, in your professional work, to stay at home with the kids. You're actually sacrificing. You can never get back what you those years that you kind of lost in the business world.
Mhm.
And if you choose to work and do whatever you can at home with the kids, you're also sacrificing. So it's a really tough choice. But I do think that in our society today, it is not at all, at least not in my world, with in my where I live, and how we are brought up here in Norway and Europe, and I worked in New York as well. It's not even there. It is not acceptable or encouraged today to be a stay-at-home mom. And
Mm.
that I think is really sad, because it is the most important job in the world.
So you're based in Norway?
Yeah, in
I
Oslo.
was
Yeah.
I was watching this TED Talk. It was after I was watching yours. I got into this loop, and she was talking about how in Norway and like the Netherlands and that whole region, loneliness is one in or is six is she calls it being haunted by loneliness.
Mm.
It's 16% of the population, and what is really ironic about that is the rest of the world looks at you guys as the happiest people in the
Mhm.
world. And
Mhm.
if 16% are suffering, or not even suffering, being haunted by loneliness, you're like, whoa, what does that mean for the rest of us? And me being in the States, I know we're kind of the worst when it comes to feeling isolated, depressed, anxious. It's almost like those rats in the cage, right? Like you take them and you overcrowd them and you give them everything
Yeah.
that they need, and all of a sudden they're not thriving, they're not mating, and they're showing all of these abnormalities. And I kind of
Yeah.
think that's what's happening in the West.
Yeah. And by the way, it's higher than 16%. They
Okay.
say that 1 in 4 people globally are dealing with loneliness. In the United States, 1 out of 2. But what I've seen in the research that I've studied, I think that in the United States, with Cigna and all the work that's been done now when it comes to loneliness and connection, I think you just have better data in the US. I think we're just as lonely over here as you
Mm,
are in the US. What I think is funny though, and I've written about this, which is not a popular opinion that I have, but you know Scandinavia, the happiest countries in the world, and the Netherlands, and all these, Norway and Denmark are always in the sort of top 10 at the very least. We are very conform countries, especially Norway. So here, you're supposed to fit into that little box, and you're supposed to behave like everybody else, think like everybody else, talk like everybody else, dress like everybody else. And so when they interview people to ask them all these questions to see, okay, how happy are you? When everyone is thinking that, oh, everybody else said they were so happy, so therefore I also must be happy. So I believe that people are responding in a way that they think they are expected to respond, as
mm,
being conformed. So I don't believe we are happier. I think there's a dishonesty there about
mm.
how happy we really are. We also are pretty high up on the suicide
I
statistics.
was just
So
gonna ask that. Do you
yeah,
know the numbers?
I can't remember the numbers. I haven't checked now recently, but we're definitely up there. And that's also in the wintertime in Norway. It's so dark. I mean, I get down. I feel I have less energy. It's really hard when you don't have sunshine. I don't know where you live, Candice, but over here in the winter, it's dreadful. So that makes people depressed. And of course it does. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never thought about the expectation when it comes to answering those questions, because it is in that I don't know if it was the Swiss or not, but whoever kind of started pioneering those death pods, right? I just
Oh,
had this.
yeah.
Have you seen them?
I haven't actually.
Oh, they are eerie. It looks like this pod that you would kind of shoot out into space, and you go into it and it basically knocks you out and then you die. So like it sucks all the oxygen out, and they
Wow.
look at it as this act of compassion, and you should be able to do this. And I recently had Kelsey Sheeran on, and she is a huge advocate when it comes to mental health and taking care of vets and what Canada is doing with their MAID program.
Yeah.
And yeah, how can you be one of the happiest countries in the world if you're also pioneering suicide pods? That doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make sense. So I
No.
think there are a lot of, and there's a lot of marketing, I would say, as countries to show the rest of the world how successful we are and how happy we are. So there's some of that too.
Oh, propaganda, you
Hmm.
wouldn't say. That's not a thing. No, I was trying to look up some research when it came to loneliness, and let me see if I can find these numbers because
Hmm.
some of them were really surprising to me. And obviously, like I'm sure everyone who's like creating content, it's a similar ailment we all have to suffer, which is everyone telling you you're not qualified. So I'm going to lean into that, and like by not being qualified, if I have access to these numbers, you have to ask what governments and politicians and professionals are doing when if they are the people that are supposed to be qualified. I'm assuming they have access to this and much better information. So if we're going to talk about the dangers of being lonely,
Mm.
it is the same as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's more dangerous than being an alcoholic.
Yep.
It can increase your risk of cardiovascular disease by 29%, your risk of stroke by 32%, weakened immune response, diabetes, obesity, doubles your likelihood of getting dementia, and it is one of the main indicators of premature death.
Yep.
So if we know that,
Hmm.
why on earth, if there is something that is making people sick, do you make them isolate? And do you force them to be by themselves? And again, as speaking as the unqualified person that I am, if I have access to these statistics, then I would assume that the professionals do as well. And there's that quote where it's like, don't put to malice what can be explained by stupidity. And
Mm.
sure, like that's probably true, but I tend to lean with I'm hoping not everyone at the top is stupid. So I do think that there is some kind of intention, and I don't know what it is. Um, but I think it goes back to just like you have to question things,
Yeah.
right? You have to question things. You don't just blindly accept what people are kind of telling you to do, especially when you inherently know that that's wrong.
Yeah. And we saw that during the pandemic, right? That we were isolated. They isolated, over here, our kids didn't go to school for a lot of the 2 years that it went on. We couldn't leave the country because we wouldn't be able to come back. People couldn't visit their families and relatives and friends. And it was really, really tough. And what I read of some of the European and Swiss, also Swiss experts on epidemics and pandemics, there were actually protocols that were signed that were supposed to, this is how we do it in case of a pandemic. What do we do? What are the steps that we take as governments, as people? And one of the things in those protocols that I believe they were signed by all the countries in 2014, and they said very clearly, they stated very clearly that do not isolate the whole population, only isolate the sick people. Because being isolated, and it just goes to show what we know about loneliness, isolation is more dangerous than the illness itself. And I think we haven't even seen the top of the iceberg when it comes to the mental health and health issues that we're dealing with and we're going to be dealing with in the coming years. And according
Mhm.
to the World Health Organization and the UN, they predict that depression is going to be the number one cause of disability in the world by 2030. That's only a
Wow.
few years out. And already now it's one of the top. So people are increasingly depressed. And we know that isolation, and you mentioned the rat pack study. And we have so many studies like that that show that you isolate mammals, you isolate animals, humans, and we get sick, we get depressed, and we die. That's just, we are hardwired to be together, to connect. And so that's more dangerous than the virus.
There's so many places I want to go with that. Um, I feel that with most things, the tool becomes the energy you put into it.
Mm,
Do you know what I mean? So when it
yeah.
comes to something like social media, I think it's a huge conversation right now. Jonathan Haidt is kind of making a massive campaign to in the States at least to make social media illegal, I guess, or restricted for kids under a certain age. Florida's kind of already pushing forward with this. And it is kind of a blanket demonization of the tool. And don't get me wrong, I definitely think there is a too early to have access to the internet and social media, 1000% full stop. However, when it comes to things like loneliness, I think it's
Mm,
easy to say that we're really disconnected because um, we're kind of using this as a proxy. We're using our phone as a proxy for connection, and it's not the same. But for some people, that might be the only thing that they have. So
yeah.
you have to look at your position and what is available to you. Like if you are in a position where you can talk to your barista, or you have one good friend,
Mhm.
or you can go to the park and maybe like start up a conversation with someone at the, as you're passing by, versus someone who might not have any touch points throughout the day. Those are two different examples. So one person, this thing might be really valuable. And there's this podcast, it's called Drinking Bros. And like the foundation of of how they became so wildly successful, it's veteran ran, and they started doing meetups with people
Mm,
online. Like they started Facebook groups, and the idea was suicide prevention, and no one should have to drink by themselves. So if you need a buddy to just sit next to you, right? Because like
yeah.
there's the saying that guys sit shoulder to shoulder and women sit eye to eye. So let like dudes be dudes. And if
Yeah.
all you need is that masculine space and have someone
Yeah.
hold it for you, then we'll do that. And that is a beautiful example of technology filling the void of loneliness and making a really big difference. But then you can look at high schoolers, probably in particular, and they're going down the hall and they're texting and they're not doing any touch points, and they have the availability, right? It's hundreds of people that are at
Mm,
your disposal, and you're choosing to ignore it. So I think you have to have like a very individualized diagnosis, and you can't just say this is inherently wrong or this is
that's right.
inherently good. um, so I
I
guess like
agree. Yeah.
how do you approach technology, especially as a parent, and
Mhm.
what access do you allow your kids, and what do you tell them how to use this tool?
Yeah, it's a great question and something that I don't have the answer to that. I feel that my husband and I, we have pretty much let go. My kids are now 14 and 16 going on 17. And we have pretty much let them choose. As long as they're done with their homework and they do well in school, they can. My son, he's big on gaming. He games a lot. And actually for him, during the pandemic when he couldn't meet his friends and be at school, the fact that they could, do their homework together over, Zoom, whatever that the technology they used, or Teams, and then he could game and have be social with his. For a few good years my son didn't go out and be with his friends in person. They would be friends online, and today, he's all of a sudden choosing to go out more and meet his buddies in person. And we think that, it's wonderful. So he hasn't lost anything. He's just kept it alive, but online. So I've changed my mind a bit. We used to be super strict. And I've just, I think I've just changed my mind when it comes to, I think you have to decide for your kids how it's working for them. And what I've seen with my kids and my daughter, she's not really into social media at all. So she talks a lot with her girlfriends on the phone, and they sort of FaceTime each other. And I think that's fine.
Mhm.
And they just they seem to be, it's just working itself out naturally. I also think that in general, I don't think we can say that social media is bad and that we shouldn't be doing it and we should ban TikTok and platforms. They are important sources of information in a day where we know that our mass media is not the watchdog that we need them to be. So it's a place where you can actually get different sources of information. And so I think social media is important for that purpose. I also think that social media is what we make of it. So as you said, you meet online to have a buddy that you can just sit with and have a drink with, or as a group. For me, my I have different groups that I meet on a regular basis on Zoom. We live in different countries, different time zones, and I love it. It's so important. What I will say is that it's important to unfollow people and influencers that make you feel bad about yourself. It's like, don't do that. Don't do
Hmm.
that. Just unfollow them. You don't need to follow people that make you feel like you're ugly or too fat or, whatever. There's so many inspirational, there's people, there's so much good content out there, and people do Instagram lives all the time. And there you actually have the possibility to speak with and engage and ask questions live directly. I think social media is actually a wonderful thing. So I'm actually all for it. Now I do think that you need to see with your own kids and kind
Hmm.
of decide how it depends on their personality. Like my kids are so different. I don't know about your kids, but
Hmm.
my two are like they could not be more different. My
Hmm.
my son is like someone who gets addicted to like gaming. My daughter not at all. So with her we never have to worry.
Yeah, mine are very different too. It's so incredible because you're like, how are you two related?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's amazing. I wanted to circle back to the depression statistic or
Mm.
projection that you had mentioned. What's your take on SSRIs and medication when it comes to that?
Ooh, it's a
Be as
tricky one
provocative
because
as
I'm
you want,
definitely
'cause
not
mine is.
qualified, right, to talk about medication. I'm not a doctor. Um, I am in general not for them. I think we are depressed because we're disconnected a lot of the time. I think we are depressed because we don't get our need for connection met and because we are in survival mode so much of the time. Research now shows that most of us are in survival mode in fight or flight 70% or more of the time, which is huge. And I don't think we really understand the implications because what happens when we feel lonely is that our brain believes we're in danger. So we're flooded by these stress chemicals, these hormones, and then a big part of the brain actually shuts down. So the frontal lobe part of the brain, which is the thinking part of the brain, the CEO, the part of our brain that we can make long-term decisions, we can pull back and get perspective, all of that is just gone. And also, it's not, survival mode is not a time to create. It's not a time to connect. It's not a time for trying to understand how the other person is feeling. And so what we do that what our brain does is like scan for potential threats, isolate, go into tunnel vision mode. And so, of course, everyone who disagrees with our opinion is a threat. So
Mhm.
that's why we get this polarization, where we can't even sit down and have a conversation. It used to be that we could be friends and completely disagree whether we voted Republican or Democrat. It didn't really matter. We could still sit at the same table and be friends. It seems to me like we can't do that anymore, and that is because we're all in this fight or flight mode. So, and that makes us when we are on, and that makes us lonely, and that makes us depressed. So I think before medicating ourselves, I always try to, okay, let's see if there's something we can do before that. And I mean, I work with high achievers, people who are seemingly, successful people, leaders, executives, and they're also dealing with disconnection, loneliness. A lot of the times they don't know that they're lonely because they are surrounded by people. They don't really realize what they're dealing with, but they're dealing with disconnection. They feel like they can't, like they can't even think straight, and they feel just generally dissatisfied and empty.
Mhm.
And a lot of that is not, it's not going to help you to take medication. Yeah, you know, you might feel it's kind of like dulls out, but it's like any addiction. You can eat food, you can eat chocolate, you can drink alcohol, you can do all sorts of things to alleviate that discomfort of disconnection for a short while, but it's not going to change anything. So when you're off of that medication or whatever you're addicted to, then you're going to feel just as bad, or probably even worse, because nothing helped. So I
Mhm.
think dealing with that disconnection, and it's not a quick fix. That's the thing. You have to, I think people have to realize that reconnecting again with our own self is not a one and done. It's something that I do as a daily practice. Every single day I get up and I have my morning practice, and I journal and I meditate and I decide, okay, and I really, and that's what I journal about. Like, how am I doing today? Like, really? Like, what's going on? Like, what are the feelings? And I think a lot of the talk today is about our thoughts. You know, how you think is important. All of that, and we talk about mindset a lot. But what's missing from that equation? And I agree, mindset is important, but our heart is important too. It's not just the psychology; it's how we're doing, like our emotionality, and also part of connection is our connection with our spiritual self, with something like believing in something that is bigger than ourselves,
Mhm.
and knowing that we're not alone. We can actually lean on and trust, and spirituality doesn't have to mean anything religious. It's really about that connection that you have with yourself, and feeling that we are connected on some level deeply as energetic beings, right?
Mhm.
So we need all of those in addition to also our physical health. So connection is really the psychology, the emotionality, physicality, and also spiritual connection. So I think we just need all of those. And when we have all of those, and it doesn't have to be perfect all the time. It certainly never is, because we're human beings. And but when we are working on these things, a lot of the people that I work with, they can go off the medication or they never have to take them. So I
Mhm.
think it's worth making that effort and working on the real issues, and at least see if that doesn't help. Yeah, by all means, talk to your doctor if this is the right thing to do. But yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree. There was this quote I saw and it said, if your doctor isn't asking you how much water you're drinking, what you're eating, how much you're sleeping, how much you're exercising, and how much you go outside, you don't have a doctor, you have a drug dealer. And I couldn't agree more,
I
because
agree.
if you're not looking at the container
Mhm.
before you say there's something wrong with this organism, like if like you imagine yourself as a plant or anything else, well, like you have to check the soil. If you're not checking the soil and the conditions, you can't just say, "Oh, the plant is broken." No, the conditions are probably broken.
Mm.
So fix the conditions and then assess the individual. So I
Yeah.
think it's the same when it comes to depression or loneliness, is like we're saying you are broken instead of saying like, well, what are your circumstances? What does your life look like? What are you eating? What are you doing? Have you gone outside? You're like,
Mm.
no, I've had 17 double frappuccinos. I haven't moved from this windowless room and I've been on my phone all day.
Yeah.
Well, it's not you, it's context. It's the
Yeah.
context that's the problem. So let's start there. And then they've done all of these studies, and one of them, which is mind blowing, is saffron is something like 30 times more effective than an SSRI. Well, what
Mm.
what are the side effects of saffron other than like maybe your fingers get a little bit stained from
Yeah.
making the tea or the rice? So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm very holistic, and I like
I
looking
agree.
at things that are much safer for you, and start there. I think it's crazy that we hit everything with a sledgehammer, and
Yeah.
that's the first thing that we go to, and then we're like, why don't I feel better? Now I just feel numb. Well, look at the side effects. And I wrote down This is, let me see if I can scroll. I wish I was a little bit more organized. Okay, so this is on the antidepressants. This is an FDA warning. Like, this is from the FDA. And it says some medications come with warnings about increased agitation, aggression, and suicidal thoughts, particularly in young people. So we
Yeah.
have people that are suffering from this thing, and now you give them this drug that is actually kind of making the things worse, seemingly by the FDA's own warning. So you create more aggression. Okay, that's good. And suicidal thoughts. You already have someone that feels out of place, lonely, isolated, and you're
Mhm.
giving something that could potentially perpetuate that.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
And back to what you mentioned about, leadership, our governments, they have the information, or at least they have access to the information about the dangers of loneliness and all these things. And what what I thought was mind blowing during the pandemic is that none of our leadership talked about sugar and how dangerous sugar is for our overall health, and also in making us depressed and feeling more, scattered, and even can make people violent. And it's just and just bad in general when it comes to our immune system. So
Mhm,
that's one thing. And also, so for me, it just seems like there's, and the fact that nobody talks about saffron, that nobody, we're pushing these medications, and it just shows you that our system is broken, that there are other interests that are more important than the general health and wellness and well-being of the population. And the fact that there's really no willingness to make us feel more connected, make us feel like we belong. And we know that it's dangerous. I've written a book about lone wolf mass shooters, and all of them, all the hundreds of mass shooters I studied, were dealing with loneliness. They didn't feel like they belonged in our society. Loneliness is I believe, if these people, these young men who became mass shooters, who shot up a school, whatever they did, if they had felt that they were part of their community, that they were accepted, that they were loved, they would not do what they did. Of course, there were other factors that made them mass killers, but loneliness is a key factor. So we know that loneliness is dangerous, and yet we always talk about something else. Oh, it's the fault of the social media, and being pushed toward extremism and misinformation and guns and all these things. And yes, there might be something to it, but we're not talking about the real issues, the issues that are actually going to move the needle. So I think, and also in terms of, there is, I believe, an interest in keeping the population separated, because as long as we are separated and we're fighting each other, we will never stand up to and actually change those systemic problems that we are faced with in our society today. The mass corruption, huge, big corporations basically deciding what politicians and governments are going to do and decide. It's just, there's something so wrong, but we have the power to change it. We just have to not fight each other. We have to, find what we have actually in common. Because when I speak to people, whether I agree with them on their political choices or whatever, it doesn't really matter. We all want the same thing. We're
mhm.
all human beings. We want to feel seen, heard, and valued. We want our families to be safe and to have enough to eat. We just want to be able to do work that we love. And yeah, it's not that complicated. We all want to feel safe. So I think there is a lack of willingness from leadership to actually do something about this.
Yeah, there's this Teal Swan post that she made, and I don't know how true it is or not because my husband was like, "That's not a thing." But either way, it's a really good visualization. And she says, if you put black ants and red ants into a bottle, they will be fine. They'll coexist and do their ant-like behavior. But if you take the bottle and then you agitate it, you shake it, all of a sudden they are aware of their differences, and the black ants and the red ants will start trying to kill each other. Meanwhile, they have no idea that there was this hand that shook the bottle.
Mm,
So it's the same with people. And when it comes to I guess like like politics is the best example, right? Because it seemed like the populist movement seems to have kind of created a massive divide. So it's liberal versus conservative, instead
mhm,
of seeing that there's this invisible hand that's shaking the whole thing, anyways, and it has
mhm.
nothing to do with your differences. And I think that's always very important to remember. And I don't know. I wonder what the solution is. I don't know what it's like over there, because here it feels like this year is going to be a wild ride, and
Yeah,
it's like buckle up, baby, if you're in
yeah.
the States. And how
Bring out the
much
popcorn.
yeah, it's what I'm a mom of
Mhm.
2 kids. I'm 5'2". I believe in the Second Amendment, but, like, there's only so much I can do even with what I have in my home. So it's
Yeah,
like, if it comes down to it, like, if you need, like, a revolution or whatever, like, what am I gonna do? You
yeah,
know what I mean? I'm
yeah.
gonna have to tuck away and hope that maybe the young people will create the change of what, like, and make this country remember what it was supposed to be. But,
Mm,
I have this friend, Michael Malice, and he talks a lot about national divorce over here, and it's, essentially how each state would be its own thing. And
yeah,
he explains, like, anarchy, and I'm like, "Well, what I can't participate in that." Do you know what I mean? So,
yeah,
at some point, it does kind of feel like the ship is too big to turn, and
yeah,
we're just gonna have to wait and see what happens, because it's like it's at this point, it feels like whoever has the most money is the one that's
yeah,
making all of the decisions, and there is
yeah,
no red or blue. There is something at the top that doesn't give a shit about color, because they are paying
yeah,
both sides.
yeah, that's right. That's what it feels like, and that's why it's so easy for us as individuals to give up. And there's this apathy. And that also makes us depressed because it when we don't have personal power, then that, just it's just this vicious cycle. And so I think we need to take our power back by knowing that we actually can do something. And when you talk about, I don't know if that's if the teal swan, what she showed there, if it's true or not, but the agitation, that hand that shakes the bottle, it's, to me, that's our survival mode
Mhm.
that messes with us because in that state we're just like, it's like two angry dogs that are just barking at each other. And so if we can, each and every one of us, take responsibility for our own fear and survival mode and deactivate that constantly. And for me, I have to do it every day, multiple times per day. And it's just simple by just grounding my feet on the ground and taking a few breaths, just like practicing that, and just like noticing that I'm coming back and getting centered and grounded in myself. Then I can, okay, then I can assess, am
Mhm.
I in danger now, or am I safe right now? And
Mhm.
most of the time I'm safe right now, so I do not need to hide, I do not need to run or fight, so I can actually just take a breath and not react to something that is annoying, or irritating, or yeah, or provoking me. But I think each and every one of us, we have a responsibility to do that practice and to deactivate our survival mode so that we don't get into this reactive mode, that we can actually observe and then respond in a way that seems more balanced and loving, because we're all, everyone's struggling, everyone has something. So knowing that and just feeling that you can have a little compassion for other people and what they're going through, I think that goes a long way. So I think we, even if our leadership are not capable of doing this with each other, if we can do it as people, and I don't know, maybe a solution is to dissolve, the United States and maybe Europe, the European Union as well. I don't know what the best solution is, but I do know that we as people have to find a way to not fight each other and be at each other's throats all the time, because we need each other and we need to figure out a way to coexist and to help each other. Because back to also the kids and how hard it is to be a mom and raise kids and have careers at the same time. And not only having careers, but just living our purpose. We having a calling and being able to fulfill on your purpose is an important part of feeling connected, because you're connected with something that is bigger than just you and your personal needs. And
Hmm.
that's really fulfilling. And so being able to do that, that takes a village, because we need that village to help us with our kids, with our family, and to help each other out. Because if you look at, I mean, and this is so, in a way, easy and simple, and yet it's not done. We have an elderly population who feel useless because they're not valued, they're useless, they're not put into work. There are a lot of these people who would love to look out after our kids and help us with our kids, even if it's not our own parents, if they're not around or whatever. So I think we can use our population and just become helpful to each other in a way that is really rewarding and fulfilling to everyone.
I agree. I think that love and purpose are so deeply connected, and I think both come back to service.
Mm, yeah.
And if you're not providing in some way, like not this neo description of provide where we equate that to money, that's bullshit, but like really truly provide, whether that's energetically, spiritually, with a nourishing meal,
Mm,
whatever that thing is, like something that's much more deep than money. If you're not in a place of service or provision, of course you're going to feel lack of purpose and you're not going to feel love and you're not going to feel connected. But what I do notice is that some people, and this might be tied to depression specifically, but it's almost this tie between being wildly selfish
mm,
and learned helplessness. And when I mean by selfish, it's everything is egocentric. So the mindset, going back to mindset, it's what's wrong with me? Did I do something? What do they think of me? Right? It's me, 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 me. So you go
yeah.
into a room and you start berating yourself, but you think that everyone is thinking about you, but you're thinking about you more than anyone else is thinking
Hmm.
about you. Where if you have someone that's connected and grounded, it's they're not over identified with the situation or with the outcome. So instead of saying what's wrong with me, they say, well, what did I what was wrong with the way I executed that, or like what was wrong with my I guess like you could say protocol or
Mm,
whatever what that is. So you go back to your steps and you try to improve that, and you're not again identified with the outcome. So I think identity is also somehow tied into there as well. So how do you get to a place where you can answer the question, who am I? And what is that supposed to look like? Because you can look at the Ram Dass model, and that's a really hard one.
mm,
I consider myself a very spiritual person. I spend a lot of time on that area of my life, and it is still very hard. Even with psychedelics, it's very hard to get to the answer that I'm the observer, because that's kind of where he wants
yeah.
you to land.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, what does that mean? So you have these people when you ask, who am I? And they will say, I'm an author, I'm a mom, I'm Candice. And you're like, well, no, these are all labels that have been put on you and
Yeah.
functions. And yes, they're important, right? Like you are having a human experience. That's not to discount that, but that's not who you are. So how do you get to the true answer of that, and like not to identify with outcomes and
Yeah.
personas?
Yeah, exactly. Because what we value in our society today is our accomplishments, right?
Hmm.
So we identify easily with those things that we do and the titles that we have and the positions and all that. And I love that, the idea of becoming an observer. And I practice that, right? But I never I never get it really right, but I do practice it. And I've noticed that when I am in fight or flight, which happens so fast without even now I can actually notice it more often, but I didn't notice it before. When I go into that full stress and I'm anxious and I'm, I'm looking for trouble. And in that state, because it's survival mode and our prehistoric brain is scanning for danger, we become selfish. We can't help it. It's a biological response. So we become self-centered because the only thing that is important is to keep this body of ours safe. And so that's why we see this self centeredness and selfishness, I believe. And so part of the practice, again, is to deactivate, to notice when we falter back into survival mode and then to get ourselves out of it, even if it means that we have to take a break from the meeting and go for a walk or, from the conversation. And when it comes to who am I, I think that is the day we figure that out, it's the day we die, probably. I don't know. But what I like to do is that I ask myself every morning and I put it in my journal and I ask myself, who do I want to be today? Because it depends on the day and it depends on what state I'm in. And I always try to identify who do I want to be in terms of who is my future self. And this is something that I learned from Benjamin Hardy, the organizational psychologist. And he talks about goals and having really impossible goals and what that does with you. And is that you then identify with the future self of yours. And because you don't have the solutions on how to get to your goals from where you are today. But if you can connect with that higher self version of yourself, your future self, someone who you maybe contemplated on who you want to become, how do you want to feel? I always ask myself that. Um, Joe Dispenza talks about this as well,
I
is
love
to
him.
identify and try to feel how you want to feel and think how you want to. How is that person, your higher self, your future self, 5 years from now? How does she think? How does she feel? What solutions does she have? Because she definitely has solutions and strategies to get to do these things that she does that I don't have today.
Hmm.
And so when we operate from our future selves, then we actually have a chance of becoming that. Otherwise, we're just repeating whatever we've been doing in the past. So
Hmm.
I think it's who we are. I think it's a becoming process and figuring it out and knowing that there's no one answer to that. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned him. His work is incredibly powerful. I highly recommend all of his books to everybody. And he has some really good meditations as well that are
Yeah.
heart openers and how to get
Yeah.
to a place of gratitude, because he talks about, just from a quantum level, the importance of experiencing that and embodying
Mhm.
that, and then being able to create real transmutation. Like, change isn't the right word, like a
Yeah.
real powerful shift from where you are to where you want to be. And my biggest hang up, it's like in the midst of flight or fight, it's so hard to be able to take yourself out of that
Mhm.
and remember these practices because you're
Yeah.
so in the thick of it. And I
Yeah.
think that's probably the whole point of meditation, is that it creates a bigger space in that emotional state to where you can do that. I
Yeah.
am terrible at it, and it's like my husband is so good, and he has such a good regimen, and he's always trying to remind me to do it, but for some reason I like this real resistance when it comes to it. But it's like, if you can get to this place where you're meditating and you can create that space, then in that moment you can grab onto your higher self or this
Mm.
vision that you have, and then show up that way instead of just letting your amygdala make all of your choices for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And like, whoa, what a difference, because it's
Yeah.
like, if you react in a space of anger, and it's not truly who you are, right? It's like your programming, your traumas, all of these things. And then you go back and you ruminate on it and you're like, there are 1,000 different ways I would have approached that if I took that emotion away. So it's like the emotion was the driving force and the thing that was making your decision for you. So if you can remove that, like, what a beautiful outcome that could have been. And now I'm
Mhm.
sitting here saying, like, I should have done that. I should have done that. So you can kind of get rid of these shoulds by just removing yourself from that emotional state, and I guess, like, not identifying as that emotional state. So I guess, do you find that with, like, your breath work, that helps do the same thing, like, you can create more pause in those
Yeah.
moments?
Absolutely. And so I think that meditation, breathwork, all these practices are great. I think everyone has to find what works for them.
Mhm.
Sometimes meditation doesn't work for me and I actually have to do some physical exercise and just move
Mhm.
around and put on some music and dance for a song, that
Mhm.
helps. Because really, and we can never get rid of our thoughts. I think that's an illusion that we can just have complete stillness and just be in this like nothingness. I think, at least in my opinion, I think our thoughts are there and it's okay. And so what I like to do is just focus on my heart, whatever I do. And that is a practice too, because my heart was so closed for so many years, probably since I was a child. And just that's just life happening to us. And I think a problem today, one of the big problems today is that our hearts are closed. So just, and I didn't even realize until I started doing this practice more and more in the meditation. And Joe Dispenza has even a free one, 15-minute meditation that is so easy to do every single day, to just focus on the heart and just focusing on one person that you love and just like think about that person. And for us as mothers, that's really easy. We can just focus on a child, right? So but really anyone that you love, it works. And just try to stay in that feeling and come back to that feeling, because the more we practice feeling that love, the easier it is to get back to once we're in that fight or flight, that super stressful moment, right?
Mhm.
And I also think it's important to acknowledge that it's not just a quick fix. It's just, it's not just snap yourself out of fight or flight. It might take a little while.
Mhm.
And movement for me always helps. Going for
Mhm.
a walk. It might be that I have to go for an hour and just get myself in a better state. And sometimes I like to write, I write a letter to someone that I'm angry with, and then maybe I burn the letter, something that I get it off my chest. So I think it's just different practices, but I do think it's important to take the 10 minutes or whatever time that you have. And I like to start my day like that, because then I'm off to a good start. And then I know that I can come back to that practice easily during my day and just remind myself, oh, no, this is who I decided to be today. So I'm going to get back to who I wanted to be today.
Mhm. No, those are all beautiful exercises. I think the thing that's connecting all of them, it's like closing the circle, right?
Mm,
Or like completing the circle. So we will have an experience that puts us into this state or a traumatic event or whatever it is, but there's no release on the other end. And back in the out in the wild, you would have all of these resources, like you would shake, you would run, you would do
yeah.
these things to close that gap. But instead, we're told that we have to be stoic and hold it in and
Yeah.
don't be emotional and right, like just get it together. And in not releasing that, you're perpetuating the state. And then your nervous system is still going crazy because even though you're hiding it on the outside, you haven't done anything. So
Mm,
I think movement is massive. There's,
yeah.
I guess it's probably old school technique, but it's the idea of like stomping and shouting. And you
Mhm.
see it on social media now, and people kind of poke fun at it. And you're like, oh, you spent $1,000 to go into the woods and scream. And some people, that's what they need. They need it to be okay, and they need other people to join along.
Yeah.
But you have to release the energy. So you don't need
Yeah.
to go pay $1,000 to go do it. You can very much go do it on your own. And I don't think it's this woo woo new age spiritual thing. I think it's very ancient wisdom that we have
Yeah.
forgotten,
Yeah.
and it's part of the grounding. So I do think that you can release that, and it is very important and therapeutic for your somatic system.
Yeah.
So it's both, right? Like it is crazy that people are spending so much money to go do this when you can do it by yourself. But I think we've forgotten, and going back to we don't have elders, and we don't
Yeah.
have that wisdom that's being passed down to us. So
Hmm.
we did this crazy practice. We had this woman come into town, and she helped us with like m- it was like it's sex magic, and it sounds crazy. I highly recommend people go check out that episode, but it worked and it was wild. And part of her practice was she calls it I think swamping, but it's all of these different emotional releases. So you
Oh
work through
yeah. I've
Yeah.
tried that. It's so good.
It's amazing, the
Yeah.
things that it does, and you feel silly at first because
Mhm.
you're walking around and you're, like, pretending to be a monkey, and then you're or whatever animal you want, because she wants you to be uncomfortable, be comfort get comfortable with the
Yeah.
discomfort, so then you can go do these other more important things, like releasing the anger and the sadness and the rage and then transmuting that into pleasure,
Mhm.
but it is powerful and it 100% works, so it's find the modality that works for you. But if you haven't tried just stomping or screaming, like, sometimes that is all the release that you need, and you're like,
Mhm.
"How can it be so simple?" And it's like, sometimes the most powerful things are.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And, you know, coming back to connection, we don't heal in a vacuum because we are social beings. So I love those, finding those groups, even if it's on, a Facebook group or whatever it is, to sit together and have a drink together and just talk about things. Or it's so, in a way, underrated in our world, and because we think we have to be so productive and efficient with our time. But one of the most efficient and good things that we can do for ourselves and our creativity and our productivity is to hang out with other people and
Mhm,
just talk about things and have a good laugh. and
mhm,
and how often do we really do that in today's world? I don't do it enough, so that's something
mhm.
that's on my list to do more of.
No, not enough at all, and I think especially when it comes to the marriage union and that
Mm,
container, I think it is so easy to fall into this kinda mundane routine and not see your person for who they are, and yeah, not appreciate them and then kinda almost get into a slump, and you think it's either you or you think it's them, but it's definitely one of the 2 of you is there to blame, and it's like, "Well, when was the last time you got together with your friends or your
mm,
family or, had a house full of people and you just hung out?" Because it's you get to see your person in a different light when they're around other people,
yeah,
and you don't see that they didn't clean the kitchen or that they showed up late or whatever, like, you don't see all of their flaws. You get to see them in this beautiful light, and I think that if you're in this tough place with your marriage, you have to we focus on, like, fixing the other person or fixing
mm,
ourselves, and maybe that's not it, like, maybe it's just you guys haven't been out experiencing life together,
yeah,
right? And you need to I don't know, it's almost like you have to, like, fill that cup up with life and vibrancy,
yes,
and if all you're doing are your mundane tasks and you haven't left your house or, like, your tip one of 2 restaurants that you go to for a date night, of course, right? Of course, there's no like passion or spark, or you can't see
mm,
that person with fresh eyes because
mm,
you're existing in this vacuum. So then you need to kind of introduce that chaos
yeah.
and other people and connection to really see your other person.
Yeah. And to see them in interaction with other people, and maybe they're funny and,
Mhm.
and laughing and joking, and you remember what
Mhm.
you liked about them in the first place.
Mhm. Yeah, or
Yeah.
maybe, like, that
I love
bartender
that.
starts flirting with him, and you're like, "Oh, wait,
Oh,
yeah,
hey. Yeah.
yeah, that's my person, and yes, he's very attractive. How did I forget that? Oh, because I'm mad about his socks on the floor." So, yeah,
Yeah.
I think, like, introducing, yourself back out into public and connection is
Mm,
massive, and it's so easy to forget that because again,
mhm.
it's, like, the simplest things.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
yeah, this was awesome, Uni. Thank you so much for your time. Before we take off, can you just plug away? Where can we find you? Anything you're working on? How the listeners can support you? And I'll make sure that we link everything below in the show notes for you.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, the easiest is to find me on social media. I'm on Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, Facebook, but Instagram is my favorite. So my handle is just Uni Turrettini. That's UNNI, and then TURRETTNINI. Sorry, and I know it's the longest and most complicated name, but it's the only one I'm the only one in the world with that name, so it's pretty easy to find me. And I also have some. I'm actually working on a book right now. I'm writing a book about human connection, and I want it to be like an easy handbook kind of tools for everyone with how can you connect more easily with yourself and have more fulfilling relationships with other people. So I'm excited about that one. And I also have a couple of free guides for people to help them either reconnect with themselves and also with other people. So just, DM me on social media, and I'll send them.
Awesome. Well, beautiful. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Candice.
And that's it for this week's episode of Chatting with Candice. If you could stay for just a moment longer and hit that like and subscribe, it helps grow the podcast and helps it become more discoverable. You can also go to chattingwithcandice.com where you can click that link that says buy me a coffee. All funds go directly back into the podcast. You can also sign up for our newsletter. I promise I won't spam you, but I do have a massive project that I am working on, and only my subscribers will have access to it. And I'm very excited to share it with you very soon. And the last part is you can go to our Patreon, and we have early access to episodes. You get to ask us questions and participate in AMAs, which is an Ask Me Anything. And I guess that is all of the housekeeping. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.